If you've been trying to balance your hormones naturally, then you've probably seen that there is a lot of information out on the internet, and it's really hard to choose which ones are actually going to help or not. So here's three things that I recommend anyone who is trying to balance their hormones naturally start off with. So if you're new here, hi, my name is Denise Rodriguez. I'm a cycle and sexual health educator, clinical herbalist, and a cycle health coach. Now, when it comes to balancing your hormones naturally, there is a lot of different angles that need to be addressed, from sleep habits to nutrition to stress regulation, which is why I decided that these three would be the key components that will help you sort of get started and dip your toes into how to balance your hormones naturally. The first one being food or nutrition. Now, nutrition is sort of the building blocks to what hormones are made out of. If you don't have the building blocks to create a certain hormone, then your body isn't able to produce it. And that's where nutrient deficiencies can also come into the picture. Because in our day and age, it can seem that we have plenty of food, plenty of nutrition, so we shouldn't have to think about nutrient deficiencies. But in our Western diet, a lot of the foods that we're eating aren't very nutritious, especially in the American diet where it is a lot more carb heavy and it doesn't have as much of the healthy proteins, healthy fats, different vitamins and minerals that our body needs. Now, when it comes to nutrition, it is a pretty broad topic, and there is a lot of different camps out there as to what is the best diet, what is the best food that you should be consuming for overall general health. But I like to keep things simple for myself and also just to avoid unnecessary stress, which is bad for your hormones in general. So, kind of my general guidelines or recommendations is to have a good source of protein. Ideally, if it is meat, for it to be organic, farm raised whenever possible. I know that isn't possible for everyone all the time, but whenever possible, that is kind of my general recommendation. Incorporating healthy fats, so whether that be organic butter, having avocado oil, olive oil, oily fish, nut seeds, kind of making sure that you're getting a good amount of healthy oils because a lot of our body is actually made up of oil. We're made up of a lot of water and a lot of oil. So for instance, the oil in our hair, skin, the myelin sheath that is on our neurons is made out of oil. So there is a lot of oily components in our bodies that we do want to be replenishing with a good source of healthy oil. And when it comes to oils, I do recommend getting it from a food source rather than supplementing it in. Then adding in a carb, either simple or complex. I don't put too much weight on which one, just as long as the quantities are like the ratios are good balance between the healthy proteins and the carbs. Then, of course, something fresh. So think veggies and fruits. And then, probably my biggest recommendation when it comes to nutrition is don't skip breakfast and don't have just caffeine. This is tea, but I mean, it's still caffeine. So, coffee or tea on an empty stomach. That is really harsh on your gut microbiome, and you do want to be having a good, hearty breakfast to start the day because that is kind of, I don't like to think of food as fuel, but it's essentially what your body is kind of using first thing in the morning. So, you do want to have a good quality, protein rich breakfast. This helps with blood sugar regulation, but also stress, internal stress. So, whenever we do go long periods of time without eating, that is kind of a stressor on the body, and we do want to minimize any type of stress in general, just because our culture does have a chronic stress epidemic. So, trying to minimize that stress whenever possible is generally a good rule of thumb. Now, my next big recommendation is liver support. Now, our liver is kind of the organ that processes our used up and excess hormones. It kind of processes them and either reabsorbs them, pushes them back into our bloodstream, or gets rid of them if they've run their course. Hormones that are included in this process and the ones that we kind of think the most of when it comes to hormone balancing is both estrogen and cortisol. These two are hormones that can be overabundant in our bodies whenever there is a hormone imbalance. So we want to support the liver as much as we can just so it can be able to do its job in processing everything else that we eat and all the other hormones, but also have enough time and resources to be able to break down and process these hormones so there's not like a backlog of them. Now, when it comes to supporting our liver, there is two things to keep in mind. There is food that we can have, or food or herbs that we can have to support the liver. So that's usually things that are a little bit on the bitter side, and I'll explain why in a second. And then also just reducing stress and any hormone disruptors that are in the environment because the liver does process these as well, and that can lead to a overworked liver. Okay, so first let's tackle why bitter. So bitter is a receptor on our tongue that kind of signals the digestive system that food is incoming. So it wants to produce the gastric juices, bile, to be able to break down the food that is going to be soon joining it. And having more bitter flavors in our food that we're having does help overall digestion because it's able to kind of prepare before food enters. So when we think of bitter foods, think of dark leafy greens that are bitter. So arugula, dandelion leaves, which already have an affinity for the liver, so that would be really good. That's probably my main recommendation when it comes to herbs for liver health is dandelion. So once again, arugula, dandelion, artichoke leaves, anything that is, once again, dark leafy greens that are bitter. I would say even fermented foods because it does have kind of that bitter, salty quality to it. So sauerkraut, kimchi are really good choices to start off to really kind of support that liver. Now, the added benefits of it being fermented is that it's really good for our gut microbiome, which we can kind of tie that back to step one, which is nutrition, because it is our gut microbiome that helps absorb the nutrients from the food that we're eating. So it makes it less likely for there to be nutrient deficiencies. So there is that aspect of liver support, so the nutrition part. And then there is also minimizing other things that it has to process. So that being usually cortisol, which is our stress hormone. So kind of avoiding chronic stress and also hormone disruptors that are in the environment. So for this, you really want to look at minimizing plastic. So cooking in plastic, warming up plastic, eating food from plastic, because plastic does have estrogens in them. Then I would also recommend really looking at your skincare and makeup products, making sure that there is no weird harmful chemicals or fragrances, which fragrances are kind of a big hormone disruptor that includes perfumes. So if you want to kind of get started on that journey, which I do recommend, I would suggest going to the Skin Deep database. It has a whole database of both skincare and makeup products and lets you know the ingredients. Now, a forewarning, when you do decide to embark on this journey, there might be, or there probably will be, because it's more commercial available products, even the high-end products that do have not the best ingredients in them, that you'll notice that there is 90% of what you own is going to be flagged as not the best for your hormones. So at that point, I just want to kind of forewarn you and not just to take everything and throw it away and panic because you've been using all these products that have really shitty chemicals in them. So before you get to that point, just take a deep breath, don't throw everything away, and just kind of have that in mind. So as you use your products or use them less while you slowly find better alternatives, and try to slowly integrate more products that are safer. So there's kind of that warning beforehand because it's a lot to handle, I know. And then the last one is stress. Now, stress we've talked about in the last 2 points, and I wanted to do a point just on stress reduction, just because there's a very unique aspect to cortisol that does directly impact our hormonal health. Now, whenever we experience either acute or chronic stress, what happens is that our body doesn't know if we are in life-threatening danger. So if there is a natural disaster or if there is a famine or something going on when we are producing a lot of consistent cortisol, our body interprets that as it's not safe to possibly reproduce. That can result in us possibly delaying ovulation or just not ovulating at all, which of course we want to be ovulating to be able to produce progesterone because that is how we produce progesterone. We ovulate, it turns into a gland called the corpus luteum, and then that gland produces progesterone. And to be able to have healthy, balanced hormones, we need a good interplay between estrogen and progesterone. So, chronic or acute stress, which I mean, acute stress, it happens sometimes. We live. So, what we more want to think about is chronic stress. So, chronic stress really dampens that interplay between estrogen and progesterone. Now, another layer to this conversation is that whenever we are in chronic stress, sometimes our body isn't able to keep up with the demand of being able to produce that much cortisol. So it turns into the other building blocks to other hormones, specifically the building blocks to progesterone. So let's say you do indeed ovulate, but you're going to have a lot lower of progesterone levels because the building blocks are being reshuffled or redistributed to be able to keep up with the demand of cortisol, which takes us back to an uneven interplay between estrogen and progesterone because you will have a lot less progesterone to balance out the effects of estrogen. Now, I honestly might do a whole other video on just the effects of cortisol on our hormones, but another point that I want to make for why we really should be focusing on reducing chronic stress is that chronic prolonged stress can lead to nutrient deficiencies because it negatively impacts the microbiome that we were talking about earlier. Plus, also adding in that it kind of steals It doesn't steal the building blocks, but your body just kind of reshuffles those building blocks to prioritize making cortisol and not using those building blocks for other things. Okay, so now let's go over everything we just talked about. So just like a general recap. So the three things that you should be focusing on when it comes to getting started in balancing your hormones naturally is first nutrition, focusing on good quality food because ultimately it is what our bodies are made up of. Next is supporting your liver as much as possible, getting rid of any hormone disruptors that are in the environment, reducing stress, incorporating more bitter tasting foods, and lastly, getting more rest and reducing the amount of chronic stress in your life. And what that looks like will depend on you as an individual. Finding a stress reducing activity will depend on what you like to do and what kind of hobbies that you like. Picking a hobby or activity, so that could be meditating, going outside, going for hikes, drawing, painting, playing video games, even, as long as it's a very chill and calming game, reading, gardening, cooking, anything that helps you just kind of be more present and detach from all of like the stressors that happen that day. And also just doing it on a regular basis because we are conflicted with things that stress us out on a daily basis. So we do want to be countering that with things that kind of help you unwind and relax on a daily basis as well. Now, if you want more information on how to get started on balancing your hormones naturally, what kind of skincare you should be looking for, food ideas, and also just kind of like the anatomy and physiology of our cycle, then go ahead and check out my starter kit on just that, how to heal your cycle naturally. In it, I go over nutrition plans, what to look out for when it comes to choosing skincare and makeup, types of hormone disruptors, and also kind of a brief overview of what you should know for overall cycle health. I'll have that linked in the description below. So I hope this video helps you kind of get started on that path of healing your hormones naturally. Because I know from speaking from experience, it was a long journey and there was a lot of information kind of just thrown at you at once. So this is a good bite-sized way to just kind of get you started on that. So as always, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I'll be seeing you next week.